Today, Nigel Farage delivered his third weekly press conference as part of his campaign on lawless Britain. And I am doing quote marks there for people who are only listening and not watching this podcast. He was broadening out slightly from Reform UK's usual single issue politics. But of course, much of the emphasis, even in this topic, is still heavily on migration. Do these conferences tell us about the current contradictions in British politics, and have reform peaked too soon? That's what we're here to discuss with my colleagues Rachel Cunliffe, our associate political editor, and George Eaton, our senior editor. Thanks so much for joining.
Hello.
Just like Nigel Farage, we're not on holiday.
We are not on holiday.
Even though it's recess. Rachel, you've been to 2 out of 3 of these press conferences so far. Can you just tell us a bit about what they're like? Set the scene for us.
So they're all part of Reform's Summer of Crime campaign, a 6-week campaign, we were told. And every Monday, Nigel Farage kicks off with a new strand of the party's law and order policy. So they've chosen one big issue to focus on all summer. And every week so far, there have been announcements of new figures who have joined Reform, either defections or people sort of outside politics who have come on board. So he kind of tends to trail them with talk of there'll be a special guest, and then you turn up and see who the special guest is. The first one was really interesting because it was in the Royal Horse Guards Hotel, which is also home to the National Liberal Club, where we had our New Statesman election night party. They're not in the same room. And the room was like, there was no lighting in the room. It was only like dark blue and red light, like really kind of sort of quite dramatic theatrical lighting, and these big LED screens that had all of these stats about crime in the UK. You know, a phone gets stolen however many minutes, or this is the rate of theft in these parts of the country. And then they also had like case files of the idea being that some of these people have been convicted of really quite serious crimes, but received relatively lenient sentences. So it was quite dramatic. The second one and the third one have both been in Reform's new shiny press conference room in their offices in Millbank Tower, which has obviously been used by many political parties and movements over the years. And it's just tends to be Nigel Farage and then the guests building out on this platform of Britain is lawless. Crime has essentially been legalised. What are we going to do? Here's our prisons policy. Here's our policing policy. Here's what we're going to do about sentencing. Here's what we're going to do about migration linked to crime. And it's kind of building on we know where Reform stands on immigration. They're very tough on immigration. It's building out to say they have policies on other things too. And crime is the next big one that they're focusing on.
Okay. And what are the main policies that they're proposing?
Oh, so many, right. So many. Well, they're going to halve crime in 5 years. That's the headline one. And they've got a whole lot of strands of how to do that. It involves hiring, I think, 30,000 more police officers, building more prisons. We had one today. We had Vanessa Frake, who's a former prisons governor, talking about supermax prisons or supermax prison regimes. They also want to set up Nightingale prisons, as in, if you remember the Nightingale hospitals during the pandemic.
Just as Florence Nightingale would have wished.
That's as Florence Nightingale would have wanted. Fast-track courts, pop-up custody suites, and then crucially, the two that are really linked to immigration, I guess, deporting all foreign criminals. So they would say there were over 10,000 foreign nationals in our prisons. We should send all of those back. Somebody actually asked Nigel Farage, do you think that British criminals imprisoned in overseas prisons, should they get sent back to the UK? And he said, yes, we'd be happy to take them. But then he also said that we should be outsourcing our prison population, whether they're British or not British, to a third country, such as, stop me if you've heard this before, El Salvador. Now, that's obviously like a big Trumpian policy. And then there were issues raised over sort of the human rights implications of that. And he said, well, maybe not El Salvador, maybe Kosovo or Estonia. So the idea of, it's cheaper to keep somebody in prison for a year in a third country than it is in the UK. So one of the policies is that British nationals, not migrants, British nationals who have been convicted of serious offences could be outsourced to serve their prison term in another country, which is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very authoritarian. Kind of far from where Nigel Farage was originally politically.
Well, the money bit of it is certainly very far from where he was politically, because it's a huge amount of state spending involved in this. And one of the things that happens at these conferences is that at a key moment, everyone will get a handout to sort of take one, pass it on, like in school. And it's always got the costings of it. And it sort of shows, this many police officers cost this much, this many prison places cost that much, and shows how you can make all the numbers add up really neatly by, say, scrapping net zero or scrapping HS2. Right. Now, interestingly, if you have been following reform over the last year, that money, scrapping those things, firstly, wouldn't raise anywhere near as much as they say it would, but secondly, has already been earmarked for things like tax cuts. So you are getting questions about, like, wait, how can you afford this?
Version of the non-dom tax.
Exactly. It's been spent many times over. But when you ask Nigel Farage, how can you afford to do this? He says, how can we afford not to? And that's kind of the pitch, which is quite a not a left-wing pitch, but it's quite a sort of state intervention, state expansionist kind of ideology, which, as you say, is quite a long way from his sort of Thatcherite tendencies.
Yeah. And what does it say, George? What does it say about Labour and where the government is at, that this party, which, I suppose you could say that they are the party of opposition in terms of the polls, but, they're not a big party Parliament seat-wise, are dominating recess so far?
Farage is adept at garnering media attention. In recess, journalists are always hungry for politicians who will give colourful quotes, and Nigel Farage stands out. I mean, I know, for instance, Tony Blair's been having Labour MPs in to visit him recently at his institute's headquarters, and those who've seen him say that he regards Farage as probably the best communicator in British politics at the moment. And Farage is making full use of that attention. And this is classic opposition politics, to hammer the government over crime. But Yvette Cooper is leading her own crime push over the summer. Labour really emphasising the increase in neighbourhood policing. And Cooper's team say that you're starting to get Labour MPs say that voters are saying, "Oh, I saw policemen around my way today for the first time in years." So they feel as if people are starting to notice some of the differences. But it's a sensitive area for the government, partly because you'll remember Yvette Cooper was the last cabinet minister to settle her budget with Rachel Reeves before the spending review, and undoubtedly would have wanted more money for policing in an ideal world. And you've got police saying in public that they don't have the funding required to stop crime rising.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, let's look at the figures, because Nigel Farage is creating this image of a lawless Britain. I think that's how he's phrased it. But I think we need to be a little bit careful of buying into that narrative, because the long-term trend is actually of crime decreasing. Yeah. Violence, burglary, car crime, violent crime. But what you do have is people noticing the low level, I think, what you'd call sort of public disorder type crime more and more. So phone theft, snatch theft, I think it's called, when you just have something taken out of your hands, or shoplifting as well, which has gone up massively. So I think we need to be careful about talking about crime on the rise. It's more that sort of public, chaotic, kind of low-level, petty stuff that seems to be more visible. But even, reports of antisocial behaviour have declined.
Well, fraud is the big area of crime that has gone up since the 90s. And it's interesting that fraud is not something that gets talked about at the reform conferences at all. It's all the kind of very visible, public-facing crime, I guess. One thing that I've wondered is part of the public frustration that the most important item that we all have is our phones, and it's got our entire life on it. Yeah. It's got banking. It's our way of communicating with literally everyone. And it's also got a Find My Phone app on it. So when your phone gets snatched, one, you feel completely cut off from society because you have been cut off from society. I know some people who even use a phone app to get into their apartment block, so you can't even get home. And two, you can see where that phone is. So to then have the police, you go and make a police report, to then have the police do nothing about it, there's kind of an extra level of frustration, and it feels like, well, what are the police doing? And I wonder if 30 years ago your wallet would have been stolen, that would have been very stressful, and you might have lost quite a lot of money, but you couldn't go to the police and then track where your wallet was. So I think if I were giving advice to Yvette Cooper in the Home Office, I would say phone theft is a real area where people feel that the police are letting them down and that crime has sort of come into their life and isn't being seriously tackled. And that's one of the areas that Farage talks a lot about. The other one that he talks a lot about is violent crime, particularly sexual violence against women and girls. And this comes back to linking it to migration, arguing that certain ethnic groups are statistically more likely to commit these kind of crimes, and also a sort of twin strategy to appeal more to women. A couple of the spokespeople that he's got in the last couple of weeks have been women who have talked about sexual violence or the police not doing enough, and about the impact of migration sort of in that area. And we've talked before on this podcast how reform has seemed quite a male initiative, like all the headline figures have been male. So I think like focusing on sexual violence is a way to appeal to women and to get the migration message across.
Yeah, and I would like to say there are a lot of caveats to those figures that are shared around a lot, and I won't go through them all now, but they are in the piece that I wrote, the cover story in this issue. George, is it going to be a problem reputationally for Reform to keep announcing these defectors from just the Conservative Party? I mean, don't they need a Labour figure at some stage?
Oh, they'd love a Labour figure, wouldn't they? I mean, the closest they've got to that is obviously Lee Anderson, who was originally, I think, a Labour councillor before he joined the Conservatives, but they'd love that, wouldn't they? A Labour MP from the Red Wall, or
they've got Simon Danchuk as well. I forgot.
Yeah,
forgot him. Yeah.
Or a trade unionist coming out for them, as Farage has recently been making a pro-unions push. But you're right. I think Labour strategists see this as one of Reform's vulnerabilities, that it's Tories in disguise. That Farage has sought to change his image, but at heart they're still a Thatcherite party that would like to privatise the NHS and has a soft spot for Vladimir Putin. I think Labour see that as the other main attack line.
Yeah, it was Rupert Matthews who was announced as the defection this week, who is a police and crime commissioner for Leicestershire, formerly Conservative. Before that was a Tory MEP. So entirely fits the trend of sort of disillusioned Conservative moving to Reform. I think Jake Berry and Andrea Jenkins have been the two highest profile ones so far. And George is right, it completely messes up the message that Nigel Farage has, that he's anti both parties, or that both parties are essentially the same, the uniparty, if he keeps taking defections only from one side of the ledger.
Yeah. It's interesting that we've been talking about the momentum that Reform has so far been able to achieve over recess, but are they peaking too soon? I mean, will they be able to keep this kind of momentum up until the next general election, or are they peaking in the polls? Is it only down from here?
Well, I think there are two ways of looking at that. One is that you're right; it is hard, if you're an insurgent party, to keep up that momentum because you're less well established. But you can look at it from the other side, which is that Reform have time to put in place serious infrastructure, to build a base of long-term donors, to build up councillors and more activists and improve their ground game. So all of that stands in their favour. But I think there's some related point you could make. I mean, one Labour minister recently argued that those who predict Farage is heading for Downing Street are over-indexing on the now. And what they meant by that is you're extrapolating from current parties. And if you look at recent history, in this volatile landscape, parties can rise and fall with very rapid speed. Yeah. And if you look at the historic trends, you'd say if you treat Reform like any other opposition party, you look at the gap between them and Labour. And okay, in some polls it's higher than others, but it's still generally in the single digits. You'd say, well, the government's probably got a reasonable chance of winning a second term, provided they deliver enough, provided that they can say things have got better, forward, not back. But I think it's the unpopularity of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and the growing sense in focus groups that voters are entertaining the possibility of Farage as PM in a way they weren't before. The phrase you hear a lot is roll the dice, that we've had the Conservatives, we've tried Labour, that in their view isn't working. So why not give Reform a go? I think that's the risk element.
Yeah, and what's it like from the Conservative side? Are there concerns about the kind of campaigns that they're doing this summer, Reform?
I think there is panic within CCHQ because they expected it to burn out. And one of the things that Tory strategists, Labour strategists too, actually assumed would be that once it hit sort of critical mass, you'd get lots of infighting and the whole thing would implode, because that's how Nigel Farage and the political outfits that he's been involved with previously, that's what's happened there. And you have had infighting. You know, Rupert Lowe is still an MP who sits there every single day and comes out with a stream of criticism against reform. He's an independent MP. You had Zia Youssef resign from the party and then come back. Like those issues are very much there. It doesn't seem to be affecting the polls at all. It doesn't seem to be affecting support. So that's a real challenge. It's worth mentioning that, and George kind of alluded to it there, yes, you are getting a surge in people going, you know, roll the dice. You know, the last two haven't worked. You are also starting to see, if you run head-to-head polls, who would you rather see as Prime Minister, Nigel Farage or Keir Starmer, Kay Badenoch, Ed Davey? And Farage loses all of those. So it's sort of worth remembering that reform of, say, polling in the high 20s, maybe around 30%, that's still 70% who don't want reform. And they have a very strong kind of anti-Farage preference, which is quite difficult to capture in a poll that's got lots of different parties. So the more realistic the possibility of Nigel Farage being Prime Minister becomes, the more you may see people going, well, I don't really like any of the others that much, but I don't want this outcome, therefore I will vote for whoever is most likely to avoid that outcome.
That's interesting. And talking about other parties, there's a lot else to look out for over the course of this recess. The Green Party leadership race is happening as we speak. The result of that will be quite consequential, particularly for politics on the left, won't it, George?
It really will. So I think the favourite is Zach Polanski, who's currently a London Assembly member, stars himself as an eco-populist, would take the Greens in a much more left-wing direction, which would be a break with perhaps the more centrist style politics you've seen from the Green MPs. And that reflects a sense that they haven't made as much progress as they'd want since the general election, and that there is space to Labour's left, and that no one's quite occupying that. The critique you get back from Green MPs is, well, now Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana are launching a new party. We need to maintain our distinctive political identity, and there isn't room for two parties offering in many areas the same policies.
Yeah, and Rachel, what about that party? I mean, how is the New Left Party shaping up?
Well, you've got to read Megan Kenyon's coverage of it, because she's got the inside track on all of the ins and outs. But essentially, we still don't know what it's going to be called. We still don't know who's going to lead it, and that's a really big question. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, you've got Zara Sultana. How much are their teams talking to each other? How much cooperation is there? Are there people in that movement who perhaps want to see one or the other and don't want it to be co-led? You've also got, and we talked about this on the podcast before, you've got those independent pro-Gaza MPs who have been sitting next to Jeremy Corbyn and are very aligned with the position on, say, Gaza, and also on, I guess, sort of left-wing anti-poverty initiatives, austerity. But there are some pretty big rifts there in terms of social attitudes and values and things. And it's certainly not clear at this point if that group of independent MPs is, you know, all in on the Corbyn Sultana project or not. And it will be interesting to see if that party fully gets off the ground. What happens to Green support? Does it completely disintegrate? Because, you know, there is only so much of an appetite for that on the left, and you've kind of got to pick one or the other. Or do they find some way to cooperate and merge, and therefore they get new voters in? And we just don't have enough information. But that's going to be one of the big questions of the summer. Again, recess, lots of political people looking for political news because Parliament is not running at the moment. That's going to be one of the big questions, like how that party develops and evolves.